In a world where power seduces not only kings but also writers, where the pen too often bends to the throne or the marketplace, a solitary figure rose up in defiant isolation: Karl Kraus. Born in the twilight of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Kraus lived amidst an age of profound corruption, political deceit, journalistic cowardice, and cultural decline. Unlike many of his contemporaries who sought favor, fame, or influence, Kraus turned his back on all forms of compromise with power. He did not merely critique injustice. He waged a lifelong war against the moral cowardice that allowed it to flourish. His battle was not for the seat at the table of influence, but for the soul of truth itself. In an era when compromise with power was not only common but expected, Kraus stood as a scandalous reminder that the true vocation of the intellectual is not to serve but to confront. This essay explores the depth of Karl Kraus' radical resistance to compromise with power, how he saw language itself as the battleground, how he perceived the press as a corrupting force, and how he embodied an almost ascetic rejection of influence. It will reveal why Kraus, often dismissed as a mere satirist, must be remembered as one of the most profound philosophical critics of intellectual surrender to authority. Before understanding Kraus' unique position, one must first grasp the moral landscape against which he rebelled. In fin de siècle Vienna, art, journalism, and politics were increasingly intertwined in a system of mutual benefit. The artist sought patrons, the journalist craved circulation, the politician desired legitimacy, and each was willing to yield truth, subtly or openly, to attain their ends. Power was not always exercised by brute force. It was often exerted through the gentle corruption of incentives, the invisible strings of social standing, wealth, and influence. To resist compromise was not merely to avoid bribes or censorship. It was to reject the entire social machinery that rewarded conformity. It was to choose poverty over prestige, solitude over popularity, ridicule over reward. Kraus recognized this web of subtle corruption with piercing clarity. His rejection was not based on naive idealism but on a tragic awareness of how language itself, the very medium through which humans negotiate reality, could be hollowed out by the demands of power. Thus, for Kraus, the battle against compromise was fought not just in political acts but in every sentence, every phrase, every headline that sold truth for convenience. Kraus' most fundamental insight was that language is the first and most important casualty when intellectuals compromise with power. To manipulate language is to manipulate thought. To corrupt words is to corrupt minds. In his lifelong publication Die Fackel, The Torch, Kraus exposed the decay of public language. He meticulously collected examples of journalistic falsehoods, political euphemisms, and cultural clichés. To many, these seemed trivial offenses. To Kraus, they were signs of spiritual rot. A newspaper that printed lies did not merely misinform. It reshaped the moral consciousness of its readers. A politician who disguised aggression as intervention did not just frame an issue. He poisoned the capacity for critical judgment. Kraus' war was therefore a linguistic war. He understood that once language bends to serve power, critical thought becomes impossible. The citizen becomes a passive consumer of slogans rather than an active participant in truth. The greatest danger, for Kraus, was not overt tyranny but the quiet, consensual erosion of linguistic integrity that prepared the soul for submission. This conviction placed him in a radical position. Even when others deemed certain compromises necessary for political realism or pragmatism, Kraus refused. He knew that every compromise in language was a step toward compromise in spirit. Kraus reserved particular fury for the journalistic class, whom he saw as the willing collaborators of corruption. In a famous aphorism, he wrote, "Corruption is worse than prostitution. The latter endangers the morals of an individual, the former endangers the morals of the entire country." For Kraus, journalists were not mere observers. They were active agents in the maintenance of power. By selecting what to report, how to frame it, and which euphemisms to employ, they became the unofficial ministry of propaganda. Their betrayal was all the more insidious because it was cloaked in the language of objectivity and public service. Unlike many critics who targeted specific governments or parties, Kraus attacked the systemic role of the press itself. He did not believe that better journalism could redeem society. He believed that the structural incentives of journalism, the need to sell, to sensationalize, to curry favor, inherently led to the betrayal of truth. This placed Kraus in an almost unbearably lonely position. He could not align with any political faction, for even the opposition media engaged in the same linguistic corruptions. He could not call for reform without becoming entangled in the very compromises he despised. His solution was radical withdrawal. Die Fackel was written, edited, and published largely by himself, beholden to no advertisers, no patrons, no political masters. It is here that Kraus' resistance takes on a philosophical dimension. For him, resisting compromise with power was not merely a matter of critical analysis. It was an existential stance that required profound solitude. Kraus embraced the loneliness that comes with refusing the comforts of influence. He did not seek a platform, a movement, or a constituency. He sought to speak the truth even if no one listened. This made his life a kind of secular martyrdom. He accepted obscurity, misunderstanding, and vilification rather than dilute his principles. In this, Kraus resembles figures like Socrates or Diogenes more than his literary contemporaries. His resistance was not aimed at gaining a better seat at the table of power. It was aimed at destroying the very table itself. His was not a tactical opposition but a metaphysical one. Power, unless utterly subordinate to truth, was always corrupt. Such a stance demanded not just courage but a kind of spiritual asceticism. Kraus had to renounce the ordinary desires for recognition and belonging that animate even the best-intentioned intellectuals. His life became a testimony to the lonely dignity of those who refused to kneel. Kraus is often described as a satirist, but to see his work as mere mockery is to miss its religious seriousness. For him, satire was not entertainment but a sacred vocation, a way of defending the sanctity of language and truth against their profanation by power. His satire was lacerating, sometimes cruel, but it was never frivolous. He believed that exposing the absurdity and hypocrisy of the powerful was a form of moral cleansing. His weapon was ridicule, but his goal was reverence. Reverence for language, for thought, for the possibility of a public sphere not wholly enslaved to lies. In this, Kraus' satire differs profoundly from the cynicism of much modern satire, which often veers into nihilism. Kraus did not mock because he believed that everything was meaningless. He mocked because he believed that truth and dignity mattered infinitely and that their betrayal deserved infinite scorn. Kraus paid dearly for his refusal to compromise. He was isolated from the mainstream literary and political worlds. He was often misunderstood, caricatured as a crank or a pedant. His readership was small, his influence limited, and his personal life marked by alienation. Yet Kraus did not view these consequences as a tragedy. They were the inevitable price of fidelity to truth in a corrupt age. To be popular, he knew, would have meant becoming complicit. To be understood easily would have meant simplifying or diluting the complexity of reality. His isolation was not a failure but a badge of honor. In this, Kraus offers a profound lesson for our time. In an era where the measure of success is influence, where even critics seek followers and engagement, Kraus reminds us that the worth of an intellectual life is not measured by impact but by integrity. Better to write for no one in truth than for millions in compromise. If Kraus Vienna was a cauldron of corruption, our globalized digital age is no less so. The internet has exponentially amplified the structural incentives that Kraus denounced. Today, the pressure to simplify, to sensationalize, to sell out is more intense than ever. The journalist chasing clicks, the writer building a brand, the critic seeking influence. All are tempted to compromise, to bend language to the demands of visibility. In such a world, Kraus' example is more necessary than ever. His life stands as a warning that once we compromise with power, even for good reasons, even strategically, we lose not only the battle but our very selves. We become the instruments of the forces we claim to oppose. Kraus teaches that the true task of the intellectual is not to win but to witness, not to conquer but to confess, not to compromise but to stand firm, even unto loneliness, ridicule, and oblivion. Karl Kraus' life and work form a stark testament to the cost and the necessity of resisting compromise with power. In his merciless defense of language, His fearless denunciation of journalism, his embrace of solitude, and his sacred deployment of satire, he modeled a form of intellectual existence that is as rare as it is necessary. To follow Kraus is not to imitate his style or adopt his particular causes. It is to inherit his spirit of intransigence, the refusal to make peace with the distortions of power, even when resistance seems futile, even when the only reward is silence. For those who would claim the name of thinker, writer, or citizen in our own time, Kraus offers both a terrible warning and a luminous hope. The warning, that to compromise with power is to surrender the very soul of thought. The hope, that even one clear voice, standing alone, can preserve the flame of truth in a darkening world. In the end, Karl Kraus did not defeat power. He did something more difficult. He remained unbroken by it. His legacy is not a set of victories, but a way of being, a way of saying, in every act, every word, every silence, there is something in this world that cannot be bought, cannot be bent, cannot be corrupted. That something is the truth, and the truth has no master. Thank you for accompanying. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below, so we can discuss. Wish you and your family good health.